physics at the Weizmann Institute. And we are proud to have you. And Joab, you're going to start? Just one word about the format. They will each speak for a few minutes, and then we're going to open it up to questions and comments, and we're going to pass this microphone around, and people will have a chance to ask.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having us here. Thanks, Oli. Yeah, I do owe a lot to BJ. We were here, I think it was over 20 years ago, for a Friday service. And then we went back to Israel. It was part of a program run by the Federation in New York. And we started Bet Tfilah Israeli very long ago, based on the model of BJ. Still ongoing. If you're coming to Tel Aviv, especially in the summertime, it's on the deck in the Tel Aviv port, and I think it's very beautiful. So when we decided to come, the natural thing was to pick up the phone and speak to Oli and ask if we can be hosted here. So thanks very much for that. You got the essence of the background. We'll try to speak briefly now and then allow you to ask as many questions as you want. I want to say a few things about the background. Oli said a little bit about it. How did we end up being here? It's all started really about a week and a half ago. Several friends that were, some of them were signatory to these internal letters that maybe you heard about in the news of reservists writing letters internally in Israel. Personally, I was not a signatory to it because I'm still in an active reserve service. But we got a bit frustrated because of the response we got from the government, both to the letters and to the demonstrations. And several of us tried to understand what's the next step. There was an internal debate about that. Not everybody agreed, but we thought there's a need to go to the US and speak to the Jewish congregations, to the government and to others to make clear what we think is happening, and especially as reservists to try and focus on what the implications could be to the national security of Israel, to the regional stability, and so on. So I would try and summarize in 3 main points of what we want to say. And as Rolly said, we published a letter online that we're getting close to 200 officers in reserve service that are signed to it. The first thing we want to say is we think these days are really urgent. The legislation is being pushed forward in a very rapid and fast way. And we think this kind of legislation that is really changing the face of democracy in Israel and maybe even the structure of the government could become irreversible very, very soon. So it's a legislation that will change how the judiciary works, as you know. There's a lot of things happening around it that we can explain later on. But we think it could become irreversible very, very soon, and then there could be many more ways to legislate things that we think could be harmful. And therefore we thought it's quite urgent to arrive and not try to coordinate it a month ahead and be here somewhere, I don't know, April or May, after everything is behind us. The second thing is, as I said, that we think, especially us, that there will be implications, there are already some, to what's happening inside Israel in terms of national security, the chain of command, and other things that are happening. All of you sadly have heard about our finance minister and his very, very sad statement. We can speak about that. There is legislation that is being already pushed about immunizing IDF soldiers in operational scenarios. We know what the intention of this, and this we think is also very dangerous. And the end of it all is that Israel is winning wars, amongst other things, because of the support that we get from the Western states and especially the US, both in terms of diplomatic support, but also in terms of security assistance, both in time of war and before the war. So we think it's crucial that you all understand what's happening. and speak up. We're not calling upon the US to do anything concrete. This is not for us to do. We're just wanting to educate you in time and to allow you to do the things that you know how to do, because I think you're all smart and the US knows how to conduct diplomacy, and you will know how to choose what you want to do when you understand the situation in detail. So that's what we're here to do, just to try and educate you. We will go tomorrow to DC and have some more meetings, both in Congress and outside of Congress. This is a very delicate matter for us, and there's also criticism in Israel for us coming here, but we thought it's of essence for us to be here. So I hope we're right, and we'll see later on.
Good evening. Again, thank you for having us. The word democracy was never an issue or something we talked about in Israel, except for social studies in high school. And the word democracy is one of the most used words lately, which is probably nothing to be proud of. And so one of the reasons we came here is to share with you that we are concerned. We are worried. The changes in Israel is something to be dealt with. And we want to share the fact that it's going on. And it's fast. We call it a blitz, an attack. You can say any word you can think of, but it is happening. Now, every Saturday night, there are hundreds of thousands of liberals going out to the streets from all different societies in Israel and saying we want democracy, or we want to stay a democratic country. And we do hope that what will happen. Just a short story to warm things up. There's just about two or 3 days ago, one of the reporters, a liberal reporter, had a visit from 2 policemen questioning him about a tweet he sent by Twitter. Now, that is not something that happens in a democratic country and not in Israel. And that's something to think of. And as my friend here said, a lot of the impact should be on soldiers, and army or the army was never in the debate or political debate in Israel and shouldn't be. And that's part of the reasons we came here to share with you our concern. Thank you.
So hi everybody, thank you for coming over here, and for the people who are watching remotely. I can share with you that personally I came over here because I'm truly worried about what's happening to the Israeli society. We're in a few years process of a split, and I think the recent weeks have been accelerating this process into a true canyon between 2 parts of society. We can see it in the military units, in my military unit. We can see it in the streets, in social media, and I see people worried, so about myself, on in what country are we raising our kids, what are we going to tell our daughters, my soon-to-be drafted son, what kind of military is he going to serve in, and what orders will he be following. And as you have said, the whole process of protests and other initiatives are all they're not organized. It's people who are worried and decides that they can't take it anymore and they need to take action. And I think that's exactly what we're doing here. We understand that Jewish community here in the States is very powerful. It's been supportive of Israel for a very long time, since the day Israel was the declaration of independence of Israel, and maybe even before. And we think it's a good approach to address the community here in the States, raise the awareness on what's going on, and call you to act, to speak, to support, and to raise the awareness in the community, because it influences what happens in Israel. It influences how the government here in the US talks, and the narrative, the voice that the government in Israel receives from the US government. We just, with Roy in the airplane, he was accompanied by Minister Smotrich, who just came to the US. And I think Smotrich's visit here is an example of the interests that Israel and the relationship Israel has with the US and government and the Jewish communities. And I think it should be reflected to the government and to the Israeli society of what do you think, and how much you are concerned regarding what's going on. So thank you again, and we're open for questions, right?
So here's what we're going to do. I think we're going to, Felicia, you want to take one mic. You'll share these two mics. You'll go that side, I'll go this side, and we'll take as many questions if possible. Rather than lengthy comments, please be respectful and ask a question, and they will answer. So you want to start over there?
Hi, thank you. I know I saw one of you earlier today at Washington Square Park, and I hope other people in this room were at Washington Square Park. My question to you is, do you think it would make a difference, really, if there were hundreds of thousands of American Jews willing to get involved in what I would call a family fight? Because I know people are reluctant to turn out. Do you think it would really make a big difference?
I'm not sure. I learned the saying, "Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor ve'en ata chofshi libatel imena." You're not the one responsible to finish everything, you just have the responsibility to act. I don't think we know that there's hundreds of thousands demonstrating every week. The legislation still goes on. There are things happening, as you know, in the high-tech community. The legislation still goes on. But we really don't know. I don't think anyone knows. I do know that our Prime Minister takes a lot of care to keep the relationship with the US. He knows a lot about the importance of the US. I'm not sure all of the ministers right now in the government understand it in the same way. There's, of course, also people hitting us because we came here and think that we should not. I always answer and say that, and again, this has to do with the fact that I've been here many, many times, both in BJ specifically, but also in the US. I think you're our brothers as much as the people in Israel. I can say that some of the ministers, at least one, is far less a brother of mine than you are. So I don't see any reason not to be here. And I think this kind of statements that you can make still influence what's happening in Israel. By the way, to my own mind, and again, I have a background in the settlements and I have many, many friends. I think the kind of apology that we got from the finance minister happened only because of his visit here and because of the response that he got from the US government.
Yoav, you want to explain what the many people may not know what you're referring to.
Okay, so our finance minister is from the far right. As you know, we had a terrible terror attack, killed 2 young people in the West Bank. There was a terrorist coming to their car and shooting them to death. And then the night after, many of the young people from the settlements around this Palestinian village called Khawara, they went into the village and burned down a lot of cars, threw stones, done many things. The army was not able for quite a long time to stop them from doing that. So that became a huge debate in Israel. And then about a few days later, or a week, the finance minister, who's, as I said, from the extreme right, was asked about that in a public venue. And he said, I think the problem is that these youngsters were trying to do what they were doing. He said, my own opinion is that the government of Israel should wipe out Khawara. And so wiping out Khawara, you can interpret it the way you want. I think the interpretation is quite clear. And then when the responses came, he tried all kinds of ways to deny what he actually explicitly said. So initially he said, I was very bothered by what happened, the terrorist attack on these 2 young people. So I said things that I shouldn't say. Then he said, when I said wipe out, I didn't mean wipe out. I meant just like having the IDF working against the terrorists and nothing more. But I must say, if you look for this finance minister on YouTube, he's a member of the defense cabinet. Yeah, he's one of very few that will raise their hand to start a war and will be running the policy of war if that happens. If you look back at his expressions and statements in the past, before he was a minister in the cabinet, for example, when we had one of these operations in Gaza, he went online and said explicitly that he thinks the IDF should go into Gaza and export 75% of the Palestinians, the civilian Palestinians in Gaza, because they're not the refugees that never lived there, so there's no reason they will keep living there. So I can go on and on. And then naturally, I think very naturally for people like us that spent a lot of time in the IDF at wars and other operations, the questions come up of what do you do if at one point, God forbid, there is a conflict and you do get a command from the government. I wanted to say legal command, but I think it's illegal command to do something horrible as this. Of course, I must say for Smotrich, again, he said a week ago, I'm shocked that people could even think that I would think of wiping out the village in a very literal way. So that brings up many, many questions. I think I'm the intelligence officer. They are the people who really shoot at wars. And the dilemmas, we always face them. But by the way, I think it's very important for all 3 of us to say, and I'm sure I'm speaking for both of them too, we all served for many, many years, best part of our life, and we think we served in a very moral army. Like we think we had very good procedures. We always tried to prevent killing of innocent people. If the IDF ever did, it was because of mistakes, operational mistakes. We always knew that we're trying to learn the lessons and try to prevent it in the future as much as we could. And we also knew we have military judiciary system. So another story that we can speak about is this young soldier who came to a terrorist event near Hebron. When was it, Rosaria? Like 3 years ago or so. There was a terrorist there lying on the floor after some people shot him. He was still alive. This young soldier came about 10 minutes after the fact. All the forces of the IDF were there, and he decided himself that he takes out his gun and shoot to death this terrorist. And I think we should be very proud in the fact that the IDF took him to trial, and he was sitting in jail, justly so. And at this very moment, there is legislation still not finalized, trying to immunize, as I said, all of the IDF soldiers in any operational case, which is, of course, horrible and shouldn't happen. By the way, I think it wouldn't happen, but just the fact that there are people in this coalition that are bringing it up for legislation is horrible enough.
Thank you for being here. I've heard it said that Israel, unlike the United States, does not have a constitution, which here is where the government derives its power. Just so I understand, from where does the Israeli Prime Minister, Knesset, and Supreme Court, which I've also heard it said is acting out of control or in defiance of the people's will, where do the Israeli governmental institutions derive its power?
Well, that's a hard point. We should have brought a legal counsel here. I'll tell you what I know, and it'd probably be a partial, maybe not wrong answer, but there are laws like the human rights. We call it the fundamental laws, it's a kind of a group of laws that should be constitutionalized. And there was an effort in Israel to form a constitution, but it didn't materialize. Maybe after this crisis, we never waste a good crisis, so maybe there will be a constitution, because we start hearing the voices in Israel calling again to have a constitution. But there are laws, and I think also from the Declaration of Independence, where certain principles were defined in order to constitute the Israeli state. And so nobody in the Supreme Court is imagining some kind of principle and judges by it. They do cling to the laws that were legislated in Israel. The fact here is, in the recent efforts, that a lot of things are going to be changed. We used to think we have three different parts that constitute the Israeli democracy, which is the judiciary, the Knesset, and the government. Actually, the government controls the Knesset, so we have only two. And if you lower the power of the Supreme Court, then you have only one. Moreover, if you nominate the judges from the government, then you have even better control on what's happening. And the popular saying is that the Supreme Court is holding back Israel from fulfilling the government or the people's will, which is totally wrong. The way to see it is it's balancing the government will, and this is our system of checks and balances. And so this is what we're fighting for, to keep the checks and balances and maintain the system that, as Joab said, become a very moral and just decision-making system in Israel.
Just like to add to what Ophir said, referring to your question. I think it was 1993, a few of the constitutional laws were legislated. The freedom of speech and freedom of employment and freedom of mobility. And of course, it's not a constitution, but there are constitutional laws in Israel. And one thing that I want to connect it to what's happening today, at that time, passing those laws was a very big debate, and it took quite a long time. And they're constitutional laws. And what we have today is trying to change the laws in about 1 or 2 months. And all the laws that are trying to be changed are the ones that are going to affect us, not being a democratic country. And that's part of what we're trying to change today. And of course the checks and balances, as soon as these laws that are trying to be passed today will make the Supreme Court almost non-relevant. So there will be actually only one relevant, powerful coalition that can do whatever they want. Please.
Thank you so much. It's really helpful to this American Jew that people from Israel are coming here and asking us to speak out, because we were brought up being told we're not supposed to. So thank you and keep coming. And so I have, I guess, a two-part question. How do you, in your thinking about what you're doing now, how do you think about the occupation, especially of the West Bank, the kibush, and also the nation-state law? These are questions that everybody, you know, the people I know here, Jews, are saying, what democracy? So I really would love to hear how you see the occupation, especially of the West Bank, and the nation-state law fitting in to your movement and to what you want us to understand.
I'll start as a former settler. Look, to be honest, I think this is not the right moment, for at least for the three of us, to speak about it, because first of all, we represent many, many dozens of officers from all different political views. I can tell you that we did have people who didn't want to sign on the letter that we signed, both from the right wing and from the left wing. Some people thought we're not speaking enough about the occupation. Some others thought we're speaking too much. Some thought we should not ask for specific help from the Americans because we're an independent state and we should not do that. So, as you know, Israel, we had 150 people. It's about 1,000 views that we need to put together. And we all know that the debate about what's happening since 1967 is a very lively debate for very, very long. And I think it will keep being that until any solution will be found. I just think what's happening at the moment is a defining moment in a different way. It will have implications on anything that happens in Israel, including what's happening in the West Bank. By the way, part of the legislation that you see already has to do with what's happening there. For example, in terms of the international law and the fact that Smotrich, that we just spoke about, wants to take and took already some of the responsibilities for the settlers which were given since 1967 to the IDF. Because as you know, the IDF is the sovereign in the West Bank, so the IDF was responsible for everything happening there, from security, anti-terrorism, and taking care of the civilian life of the settlers. So Smotrich wants to take it away from the defense ministry. He took some authorities already, so he's not only the finance minister, he's also a minister in the defense ministry. But at the moment, the chain of command was not hit by this legislation and changes, but it may well happen in the future. So I think maybe it's a different occasion that we can come, and I have my own views, and Ophir and Roy has maybe different views. I think at the moment the urgent thing is to understand that when one wants to do a constitutional change, a very fundamental one, there needs to be a very wide consensus. And a very wide consensus is not only the right-wing coalition. You know the tyranny of majority. I think the US has, in terms of political philosophy, many, many more years than the Israeli democracy, and many, many more fundamental ideas on what checks and balances should look like. And although, as Ophir said earlier, the Israeli system is very different from the American one. So we need to understand the differences if we have this communication about the judges, about the executive branch, and how it deals with two houses here and one Knesset in Israel. There are many, many details, but the end point is, if one wants to do this kind of change, it cannot happen in 2 months, and it cannot happen despite all the experts, we're not legal experts, saying this is the wrong way to go. Almost all of them in Israel and in the States. As you know, even staunch supporters of Bibi Netanyahu were saying this is the wrong way. All is deciding.
Thank you. I was this morning at an Orthodox synagogue, and Rabbi David Stav from Tzohar explained how so many people in Israel understand how this is perceived by many to be as an existential threat to their tribe. You know, the 4 tribes, the 5th Arab tribe and the 4 Jewish tribes. And my question is, you give me some hope when you mention, for example, that a prospective bill that would challenge Tohar HaNeshek, the Israeli military moral code, wouldn't be able to pass. The human dignity law, the basic law that empowered Aaron Barak to be such an activist judge, was passed, as you mentioned. It was after a lot of debate. It was under a Likud government. It was under Justice Minister Mary Dor of the Likud. Are there, when it finally comes down to a second or third reading, are there people in the Likud who are still in the Knesset who perhaps won't pick up their hand to support this? Is there any hope at the political level that within their coalition partners, we know they're beyond, but in the Likud itself, is there anything left of that old Likud, perhaps, of people who are still in the Knesset?
You're challenging us. I think what we can look at is the facts. And this is going on for the past 2 months. And seems like the Likud, Havei Knesset, the Likud party, are all united around these changes. The reason is probably their leader, or Benjamin Netanyahu. Is it is it for a right reason? No. Is it for the best of Israel? Probably not. But as I see it, the fact that it was not changed in the past 2 months and nothing can persuade them, the only, maybe I'd say, our next test is when they're going to have the next voting, which will probably take place in a month or 2. That will be the next exam. Waiting for that is not, I think it's not a solution for us.
I want to add a few words. It's a very hard question, and I don't think we have answers for that. But if we discuss strategy on how to deal with this crisis, I think that the more the fact that people will understand what are the consequences of this move to Israeli society, to the Israeli military, where not just reservists, but officers are starting to ask themselves questions on how is it going to look like after legislation passes. The Jewish community here, the federal government, as long as people in the Likud party will understand better what are the consequences besides the political map that we're the right wing and they're the left wing, I think the chances are that some people will gain confidence in what's the moral thing to do. And sometimes it's only when the hour comes, it's not before that. So that's my hope. That's why we're here, because we think we need to do the effort and leverage as much as we can on the people that we think we can trust in the Likud party. We hope so.
Hi, we're so proud and grateful you're here. But a quick question. I know it's very Talmudic to try to understand what's going on, but we really could use some direction. Who do we call? Who do we give money to? What do we do?
It will be a short answer. Like, as I said before, I think when American jury want to do something, you can convene, and you know better than us what can be done towards like Likud members, specific ones, if you want to do so, what can be done vis-a-vis your representatives in Congress, and I think you'll have enough ideas, and it's not healthy for us to be the ones giving it. We all understand this event is delicate. I think there will be people who will look at this recording and will try to look very carefully at what we say and what we don't say. And I think it's better to keep it that way. Just as an example, I think the US administration had shown the finance minister what can be done and how it can be done diplomatically. And I really think, like, again, from personal knowledge, these people that grew up in the West Bank, remember this Ben Gvir and Smotrich, they were born after 1967. They don't know anything else. And if you're a settler, you always have people in the Israeli government that you can call and tell them, okay, this is not that bad. Maybe bring me this thing at the evening, or maybe bring me that thing. I think they're not well acquainted with international relations, not of the importance of it and not the implications. Of course, the Prime Minister knows that very well as a person who grew up and lived here, been to the UN. He understands very, very well. He knows that we cannot do anything against the Iranian threat without the US support. We all know historically that without the US support, we would most probably lose the Yom Kippur War. So there are people who knows the implications. So I think you will know, you're grown-ups, you're a big country. We don't need to teach you anything.
I'm really grateful that you came here. I have a husband who was in the IDF and a future stepson-in-law who was in it, and risking their lives for this country. A Reform rabbi recently spoke and said, well, no, that we had two kingdoms of Israel, less than 100 years each, and this one's only 75, and we have no guarantee that it will continue, and I really want it to continue. So I was just wondering if the Supreme Court now, before they pass this law, can they do something else that might help the situation? I don't really know, but until it's actually passed, could they make some kind of ruling or something that could put a stop to this for now while you all negotiate with each other? Because it's only, 4% difference between the two sides in Israel. It's not like the whole country agrees with what Netanyahu's doing. So I just wonder if you know of anything like that, any solution, because I was always told that since I don't live in Israel, I don't really have a right to tell anyone there what to do, but I want to help, by writing my Congress people or whatever I can do. So let us know. Thank you.
The check and balances of the Israeli system is very delicate, and the Supreme Court always, and today as well, looks at it a very delicate way to handle their power. And although there is some narrative now around changing the system, that the Supreme Court is too powerful. The fact is, it's not that way. The check and balances is really working quite well, and so the Supreme Court now are trying to do their best not to interfere where they think that will probably break this check and balances that is already very delicate. Now, the Supreme Court is our shield. Our shield, I'm saying our shield as an army, as officers, and when we act and we do our best to avoid collateral damage, and we do everything in our power to preserve the moral value of our soldiers, even in real big conflicts. The Supreme Court is our shield. The whole community, the world, knows that there is some kind of a judicial court that is checking what we're doing, if it's right or wrong. So they have their job. And what we feel today is that there is some kind of change in the way the executive wants to change the law, or to make the Supreme Court with no power. And even though we can see that they're still acting as the law anticipate them to act. I'm talking about the Estachayut and of course the Supreme Court. So we hope it will stay that way. The big question will be when the laws will pass and part of the system, or part of the I'll say the police or the army will have to take a stand, or to decide if there is some conflict in arguments. That would be a good question.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you for your sacrifice and coming here and your service. And I just, we're all heartbroken in our own ways to see this as American Jews. I think my question is, there's the urgency of now. There's an emergency now. There's bleeding, and that has to stop now. And assuming we all become pains in the asses and do what American Jews do best and help with that, what's the next step? Because as you've mentioned, there's a canyon growing between these two parts of Israeli society. And this is not something that happened overnight. This is decades of power being built, and honestly fueled by American right-wing organizations, evangelical organizations. This didn't come out of nowhere. And there's the stopping of this immediate threat to democracy, and then rooting out the cancer. That again, I think Americans are also responsible for. And I wonder what, do you see the sustainability of these protests, this movement being able to carry through in fixing the longer term problems that are still going to be there, even if this legislation, or even if this moment in time is stopped?
First of all, we just realized we do have a legal expert here, so you can come back with the questions about the law, and we let someone who's an expert to speak about that. Well, there will be a lot of healing to be done. And it's an ongoing issue, as you said. I think part of the fact that we don't have a constitution is because we have very different factions and ideologies in Israel. We managed to hide between this Jewish and democratic state for very, very long. And at this moment, maybe it's getting out of hand. I think hopefully, if there will not be blood, there will be healing and communication and conferences to have. And at least me personally, that's the only thing I think we should all strive for, to stop what's happening now. Really, there is no reason why it will happen in 2 months and not in half a year or a year. This government was just elected, so they have potentially 4 years. There is no reason why they will not go everybody together to the president and try to find a solution. We hope it will happen, but there are different scenarios. Some of them are horrible, some of them are optimistic. As I said at the outset, I don't think any of us knows. The fact that we're Israelis and just came from Israel doesn't mean we know any better than you do. Well, we know the details maybe better than you do, we should. But how it will all end, we really don't know. The fact that we're here is partly because the responses up till now, we think, from the government, to say the least, were not proper. Like calling us anarchists or terrorists or other names, go to hell, telling the fighter pilots to go to hell. These are not the kind of responses that will heal the society and the situation at the moment. Again, we all should hope that it will happen very soon.
Hi. Toda Shabbatim. Thank you for coming. I'm an American Israeli. My businesses are in Israel, and I served as a totchan, as a artillery. I'm going to make a statement, not a question. I'm going to make a statement, not a question. I was in Washington Square for the last month. There are so few Americans showing up, and hundreds of thousands of Israelis, our brethren, are begging us to come out and begging us to make a stand. We all remember what happened when Russian Jewry were in danger. Thousands and thousands of us marched in the street. Why are we not doing it now? I'm begging you all to get up, get off your rear ends, and do something about it. Thank you. 12 o'clock every Sunday in Washington Square. Our dear friend here spoke today about, but it's really, really important. Organizations like J Street, and I'm very involved in J Street, are raising the voice and support them. Please come out and say something and do something. Just don't sit back, because we are in an existential moment. No Israel is, I mean, my whole business, my whole livelihood is in Israel. I have a huge multinational corporation, and it is in danger. These guys, all their businesses are in danger. Their families are in danger. My friends are in danger. Our families are in danger. We have to get up and do something. Please.
I want to ask you as military personnel about the question of insubordination or refusal to follow orders. Oh, is that better?
Yes.
As military personnel, I want to ask you about insubordination or refusal to follow orders. Do you draw a line, or do you hear about like circles that you're part of? Like, what would be the line? Should this thing continue and part of the bills go to a third vote and pass? We hear about voices and certain actions in the military, like Tayaset 69 and others. So just wondering if you guys had your own view on this. Thank you.
Okay, so we're not representing any reservist groups or other people in Israel. Just as a background detail, I don't know if most of you know that Israeli military is leaned on the reserve units, and especially some units like squadrons are especially lean on the reserve people that come every week to fly the aircraft and the day-to-day tasks, not just in operations or wars. Okay, so there is no squadron if the reserves are not stepping in. So that's just a background. What you hear from Israel is a mixed marketing and facts, and I'll try to differentiate between the two. I think, as I said in the beginning of this talk, people are asking themselves, what's going to happen? How am I going to serve when this legislation is going to pass? And it's from unclear to very uncomfortable, okay? And then you ask yourself, okay, so what am I going to do about it? Am I waiting for the line to be crossed, and then I'm saying I'm done volunteering, because it's not an obligatory service, it's you're volunteering to service, especially when you're a pilot or other military professions? Or am I saying something beforehand to signal, listen, we're going to have a crisis, a national security crisis? So the fact is that what you've heard from people in Israel is that kind of signal that says, we're thinking about what's going to happen, we're very worried. And those voices were, we heard them after a very long debate within the units, because these people are very dedicated to what they do. Dedicating a day every week, at least, is a true effort, okay? And so when some psychological barrier was crossed, like Squadron 69 said, it's not like they said we're not coming over. They said we're taking a day off to think together about what's going on, and this made a big noise. The other side, the marketing side, was this is insubordination. They broke the mutual law between the reservists and the IDF, and there was a big debate around this, including some other name callings that Joab just mentioned, which me personally think that it's generally implicating on the speaker and not on the people who spoke on. And so I think this is what you need to take from what you hear in Israel, okay? It's people who are very worried about Israel's national security, and they're asking themselves, how am I going to keep contributing to the national security of Israel when I'm worried about the decision-making process, about no checks and balances? Yoav said, talked about what's it like to express power during a conflict, and I spoke about this today in Washington Square. When you drop a bomb in the middle of a city, in a high populated area, it's a scary thing, okay? You need to be very, very confident and trustful on the decision-making process that said this is a lawful target. It's a moral thing to do to drop this size of a bomb, and usually a very large size bomb, on that building, okay? And if you're not fully confident that this is what's happening, it's a conflict you can't settle, okay? You cannot perform your tasks. We had this kind of talks after we bombed Salah Shkhade. If the name says everything to you, it was an Arkai terrorist. The intelligence knew exactly where he's at, but unfortunately, a lot of kids were killed during that attack because wrong assessment of the implications of that bombing. And the same thing, pilots said, what's going on? let's check ourselves and see if we understand what we're doing and what is exactly the decision-making process. There was a very lengthy process within the Air Force, including legal counsel that has explained exactly what's the process of examining each target, and the trust was built. And today, I said it earlier, I think we have one of the most robust processes in the world. I don't know any Air Force who is investing more effort in examining the targets and holding back its power until it's certain that this is a justified target. But we're afraid we're losing it because it's a combination between the legislation and the voices that we hear from the government. And this is a deadly combination for us.
Just a little addition to that, and I think I'll be a bit more blunt. We have a Supreme Court ruling from the 1950s after an event in Kfar Qasem where we had just a little bit of history. The IDF put a curfew on several Palestinian villages. There were several farmers that came late from the fields, and they were killed, murdered by soldiers because they were late to get to the curfew. And we had a Supreme Court ruling back then that there are commands that you should not obey. They are illegal, and as the Supreme Court said, they have a black flag flying over them, and any soldier should know them. We're teaching that to our soldiers, combat soldiers and others in many, many military courses, and we should do that, and we are doing that. So it's very, very clear that there are commands, I think it's true for any army, that a soldier should not obey. So I'll be very clear personally, if I ever get a command to wipe out a Palestinian village, I would never obey. The opposite is true. No, I think no applaud is needed. I think it's obvious. I think any soldier with a mind should not obey such a thing. Not only not obey, but actually fight back with your gun against anyone who's trying to do that. So I think these dilemmas, when you have a cabinet minister saying that, and again we can speak about his intentions and thoughts, and the fact that he expressed himself saying, I never thought about it, that's all fine. But I'm saying, we know what Ben Gvir said many, many years, many, many times. We know Ben Gvir had a poster of a person who killed several dozens of innocent Palestinians. So this is a real pressing question. It's not something theoretical that we're speaking about. It's not fantasies. We need to be speaking about it now, not later on.
Hi. I've been here a month. I'm from Israel. Tomorrow I'm going back to the demonstrations because it is a war. It is not a comment, it is not a question, it's a request. Where are your kids? Or your grandkids? I mean, I'm lowering the age here, and everybody my age here speaks fluent Hebrew. And I think I know what the problem is. First day here in New York, I met this wonderful Jewish doctor called Alan from Bellevue. Amazing, funny, very pro-Israel, but sane. And his son is 22 years old, in college, does not want to hear the word Israel. He doesn't want to visit, he doesn't want to support, he doesn't want anything. And if we're talking about what we can do, is maybe not send money, and not wait till Pesach to Higadet el Bincha. Because this is Mitzrayim. This is an emergency. You have to bring your kids and explain to them that Israel is not what Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez says it is, and it's also what not Bibi and Ben Gvir say. It is a very delicate situation, and we should support liberalism, democracy, and peace, and we should also support Israel, not blindly, but something to be not black or white, and bring your kids and grandkids to, where's the demonstration? Washington Square. But they have to know what they're fighting for. By the way, the first demonstration against this whole judicial revolution was led by 60-year-olds and up. They're always the first. They're the wisest. They can see what's happening. And then all the young children came along, and they have the power. And they make the noise. So this is my request to you. You all have a large Jewish family, and I know how it is. I mean, in my house, we fight against racism, we fight for peace, and it's very hard to be a certain minority, because if we were in a different synagogue, there will be thousands of people there, and they're probably supporting both the occupation and this legislation. So you need to consolidate this power, make a lot of noise, and that is, thank you.
To what extent do you think that Bibi's legal problems play a role in all of this?
You said it. I would say it probably does play a role. How far, how tight, how far would it take it? I'm not sure. But what we can see is the consequences of bringing in extremists to the coalition. Extremists which were probably in a different government would not be in there. And if you look at many years before, they were not let in there. I'll say like Ben-Gvir. And they do not represent, I'll say, the majority of the Israeli community or what they think of. And we can see how it affects us today. Part of it was the story I told you about this reporter and his visit by policemen. So I presume it does have effect. It does have effect that our Deri, which is a convicted felon, is back into, in a way, back to business, et cetera, et cetera. So it does. I want to refer to the friend here was saying that 60 years old are the first to be in the. I want to speak out personally. My parents were born in Israel. They're Tzabars. My grandparents came from Eastern Europe, as a role I already told you. But my parents and their friends, their colleagues, which are a little over 60 already, they're all every Saturday night in the streets, because they have, after building the country, they have the feeling that someone is stealing their country. And that's terrible. That's part of what they're feeling today. So I would say the 60 plus went out first, but now everyone is after them. And I think that's part of what we feel here there in Israel. And another thing that I want to share with you, again, personally, we are retired, veterans, reserved, unreserved. But we have kids in the Army. I have 2 kids in the Army, and one is an officer, and one is going to be an officer soon. A daughter, which is now has a credit to go to being an officer, but according to the new government, maybe that will stop, which is unbearable. I think my friends here have kids in the army as well. And we have to send them to the army, and it's nothing that it could be spoken against. Everyone in our society goes to the army because they think they know how important it is to go there. But if the decision making will be different from what we built in the army, and when I say built, I was 30 years in the army, the procedures, the way of thinking, the moral values we went down should stay that way. But if it will be changed, our kids going to the army will be questionable. That's something that should not happen in Israel. We don't have the ability to have that. We're still surrounded with quite a few countries who really do not speak in our favor, I'd say the least. So, again, from my personal point of view, there are a few other things that affects this kind of change, this attack on us.
We'll do the last couple of questions, and then we'll. They landed this morning. They flew all night and landed this morning very early. They've been up all day, so we're going to take a couple of questions, and then we're going to let them go to rest. And tomorrow they have a long day. They have to go to Washington, D.C. So thank you so much for being here with us, and let's take another couple of questions.
Yep, thank you guys for coming here. So this topic clearly tears the Israeli society in half. And I'm curious about your opinion on any prospect of a compromise. So it's a two-pronged question. Maybe one, do you have any empathy, or you see the point of view of the people that say that a reform in judiciary, significant reform is needed? And second part is, what do you think could be some compromise that could resolve this and help the Israeli society heal?
Maybe we'll give three answers, I don't know, like different answers, but I have a very, since we were deliberating about coming here, I have a very simple answer for myself at least. I'm not a legal expert and I'm not a politician. As soon as I see the two heads, at least the two heads of the opposition, namely Gantz and Lapid, it would be nicer if there will be more, but at least these two, sitting down and saying there is a real opportunity for a compromise, especially if it ends up and they say, we agree on this reform, I would stop coming here to speak in front of you. Maybe I'll come to New York for other reasons. But for me, it will be enough. And again, I'm not part of the group of politicians that need to get to an agreement, and I'm also not a legal expert. So for me, it's very simple.
Wow. Using the word reform is underestimating the real things that happen. It's a revolution. That's how we see it, or I see it. And if it was a reform, I'd say, okay, let's talk about it. We have time. We're 75 years these days, in a month or two. So we'll take another year. But what is happening is not a reform. And again, I'm not a legal expert as well, but there is a difference between changing the system and changing a few laws in order to do things better. And if there is some criticism about the Israeli system, the law system, okay, let's try to amend it. And for the other question, I think that democracy cannot be compromised. There is no more democracy or less democracy, nothing to talk about. It's either there are checks and balances in the system or there isn't.
So last question will be from here.
Just about actions that we can take, and I don't know this. Oh, I have to talk, okay. I just wanted to mention Jewish Voice for Peace. I don't know the organization myself, but a friend from Oakland sent me a mailing from them, and they're organizing people to talk to their senators and congressmen about this issue. And you know it's hard, I mean, to be critical of this. What did you say?
No, I want to say that this was already addressed, the question of this question was already addressed about they called us to call or write to our representatives and activate as much as we can. That's what their request was in order to be able to preserve Israeli democracy, and let's not get into JVP for or against. This is not the place or the time. So last question will be here in the front, and then we'll close with this.
I think the most powerful thing you can have is the personal. Can you discuss what personally in your service do you see changing? Like instances in your service that you face that under the new legislation would have been completely different, things that, you know, stories that we can tell, we can bring to our communities, because it's really the personal stories that change things.
Well, I think I've touched that previously, but I can say in 30 years of service, you're doing a lot, especially in a very peaceful country like Israel. I've lived in bases for a very long time, being on alert. And so, besides the sense of contribution and the fact that you're contributing to the national security of Israel, eventually, you know, at night you're doing your math on have I done right or wrong, and I think that's what I tried to touch here in the talk, and we want to find ourselves always in the moral, the rightful, the just side of history of the globe. I think in the Ukraine conflict, it's been more present whether you belong to the rightful side of countries or not. And I'm not sure. Saying I'm not sure, it's an understatement on how things would have turned if we wouldn't have had the robust system of checks and balances. And I think that that's exactly where we're headed. It's a very clear direction on why these laws are being passed. Okay, the immunization of soldiers, telling them you're not responsible, legally responsible on what you'll be doing from now on, is actually a strong message of you can wipe out villages. Don't worry about the consequences. And so I think personally, I'm very proud of the years of service that I've done and my friends done, but I don't think it would be the same when this legislation will pass, and I think it's the same for my friends with me.
I'll try and be brief. Like, I'm from the intelligence side. We're sending them the targets, and we need to make sure that we're sending out the right targets. Again, I'm always very proud of the fact that whenever that happened, We had military attorneys with us. We were discussing the collateral damage. There are many, many examples that were already published. We know that Hamas was hiding in hospitals, in schools, in many other places, and sometimes we knew it for days, that they're directing the shooting at our civilians from hospitals, and no one was ever thinking of hitting a hospital. And the legal advisors were part of the discussion. No one thought that they were harming the cause of the operation. Sadly, these days, if you drive on the highway in Tel Aviv, you will see signs, by the way, I'm quite sure financed by right-wing people from America, saying we need to fix the judiciary to let the IDF win the war. And I think this is a terrible lie. Sadly, I think this terrible lie may convince some Israelis this may be in some way the truth. So I would want any intelligence officer in the foreseen future in Israel to have the same understandings, and I don't want that to be changed. And for the judiciary to be very strong is part of that thing. And again, I want to emphasize it's not as if the judiciary said something and the commanders didn't agree and they forced them to do that. I always seen the generals being the first ones, and the commander of the Air Force, more than many, took a lot of care to understand what's coming to his table, and I hope this will continue this way.
I'll speak from the perspective of the ground forces. I had battalions in the West Bank, and they risked their life every day not to take action against probably dangerous people, but respect the civilians, even help them, not only respect them, but help them. And through doing that, having to stop terrorism, which it is part of their mission, and there are settlements in the West Bank. You have to, of course, defend them, and you have to do both things while risking your life on one hand and respecting the civilians, the Palestinian civilians on the other hand, and honoring them and not harm them if do not have to be harmed, etc., etc. So it really is a lot of contradictions, and it's quite a challenging thing to do. And if I look forward and what's happening today, just saying wiping out a village is something that you have to explain to soldiers, something that is really different from what we educate them all the time. So that's from my perspective.
I just want to say one more thing before we're convening. We're talking about what's happening in Israel, and sometimes you ask yourself, how do I measure how successful a country is? Excuse me. Is it a financial measurement, academic measurement, many other aspects? And I think we're in a synagogue. So my measurement is when I close my eyes, where do I dream to raise my kids in? We say, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. I want to see my country headed to a direction where more people are dreaming to come over to Israel and raise their kids in the country. And I'm positive currently the direction is not that way. So we're here to ask your help to get this direction back to the right place. And then when you close your eyes, you'll dream the same thing in us. Thank you.
we want to say really thank you so much to Ro'i and Ophir and Yoav and all the people that they represent for their moral courage, for standing up, for taking the time to come here and to really stand up for Israeli democracy. And as well as to all of you who came tonight, to all the people who are participating from home. We are grateful once again to the Marlene Myers from JCC of Manhattan, to Rodef Shalom, Anshe Chesed, Romemu, and Lapshul for co-sponsoring with us. And let's pray, and not just pray, but be active and stand up and continue to make sure that as was just said, that we get back into the direction that will guarantee democracy and moral strength from Israel. Thank you so much. Shavua Tov to everyone.